Victoria Pierce smoothed the fabric of her modest black dress as she stood at the entrance of the Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom, clutching her invitation to the annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala with trembling fingers. At 35, she had spent the last decade working as a dedicated pediatric nurse at Westlake Memorial Hospital, never imagining she would find herself among Manhattan's elite at one of the most prestigious charity events of the year. The invitation had come unexpectedly from Dr. Richards, the hospital's chief of pediatrics, who had fallen ill and insisted Victoria attend in his place. "You've earned this, Victoria," he had said. "Your work with those children is nothing short of miraculous." But standing there now, watching diamonds catch the light and hearing the gentle clink of champagne flutes, Victoria felt painfully out of place. She had borrowed the dress from her roommate, done her own makeup and taken the subway to the event. The valet parking alone would have cost her half a day's wages. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the opulent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like suspended constellations, casting a warm glow over the crowd of New York's wealthiest philanthropists. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Victoria accepted a glass with a polite smile, hoping the bubbles might calm her nerves. "First time at one of these things?" asked a kind voice beside her. Victoria turned to find an elderly woman with silver hair and knowing eyes, dressed in an elegant emerald gown. "Is it that obvious?" Victoria laughed nervously. "Only to someone who's been attending these functions for 40 years, the woman replied, extending her hand. "I'm Margaret Harrington. Victoria Pierce. I'm here representing Westlake Memorial's pediatric department." "Ah, Westlake. My late husband was on the board there for years. Such important work you do." Margaret's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "Come, let me introduce you to some people who would love to hear about your work." For the next hour, Margaret guided Victoria through the crowd, introducing her to donors and board members who seemed genuinely interested in her stories from the pediatric ward. Victoria gradually felt her confidence growing as she spoke passionately about the children she cared for daily. "The treatments are advancing so rapidly," she explained to a captivated group. "But sometimes what these kids need most is simply someone to hold their hand through it all, someone who sees them as more than just their illness. That's precisely why organizations like yours deserve our support," said a deep, resonant voice from behind her. Victoria turned to find herself looking up into the piercing blue eyes of a tall, distinguished man in his early 50s. His tailored tuxedo and commanding presence immediately identified him as someone of significance, even before Margaret's barely concealed excitement. "Victoria, may I introduce Jackson Blackwood?" Margaret said, a note of reverence in her voice. "Mr. Blackwood is our most generous benefactor." Victoria's breath caught. Everyone in New York knew the Blackwood name. Jackson Blackwood had transformed his father's modest shipping company into a global empire, amassing a fortune that put him squarely on every list of America's wealthiest individuals. He was also notoriously private, rarely appearing at public events. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Blackwood," Victoria said, extending her hand. "Your foundation's contributions to pediatric research have changed countless lives." "Please call me Jackson," he replied, his handshake firm but gentle. "And the honor is mine. Margaret tells me you're on the front lines at Westlake. I'd love to hear more about your experiences." There was something in his intense gaze that made Victoria feel he was truly listening, not just making polite conversation. She found herself sharing stories she rarely told outside the hospital, about the 5-year-old boy who insisted on wearing his Superman cape to every chemotherapy session, about the teenage girl who decorated her hospital room with hundreds of origami cranes she'd folded during her long stays. "These children face the unimaginable with such courage," Victoria said, her voice softening. "They're my heroes." Something flickered across Jackson's face, a shadow of emotion quickly concealed. "I can see why you're so valuable to them," he said after a moment. "True empathy is rare." Their conversation was interrupted by the announcement that dinner would be served shortly. Victoria glanced at her table assignment, table 19, far from the main stage. "It seems I'm at table 3, Jackson remarked, checking his own card. "Would you do me the honor of joining me? I'm certain we can arrange it." Before Victoria could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. Her security team in dark suits had entered the ballroom. surrounding a woman who moved with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to being watched. Her platinum blonde hair was swept into an elegant updo, and her red gown seemed designed to command attention. "Cassandra," Jackson muttered, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. "Your wife?" Victoria asked, immediately regretting the question when she saw his jaw tighten. "Ex-wife," he corrected. "Cassandra Reynolds." She wasn't on the guest list. Victoria sensed there was much more to the story, but before she could say anything, Cassandra had made her way to them, trailed by photographers and admirers. "Jackson, darling," Cassandra purred, air-kissing both his cheeks while completely ignoring Victoria. "You've been impossible to reach. I've been trying to discuss Hunter's summer arrangements." "This isn't the time or place, Cassandra," Jackson replied, his voice low and controlled. "We can schedule something with the lawyers next week." Cassandra's perfectly made-up face twisted into a brief scowl before reassembling into a camera-ready smile. "Always the businessman, aren't you? Very well. But do remind that new nanny of yours that Hunter needs his special vitamins. She completely forgot last weekend." "Hunter was with my mother last weekend," Jackson corrected, a note of steel entering his voice. "As you well know." Victoria felt acutely uncomfortable witnessing this private exchange. She began to step away, but Jackson gently touched her elbow, as if silently asking her to stay. Cassandra finally seemed to notice Victoria's presence, her eyes coolly assessing the simple black dress and lack of expensive jewelry. "And you are?" "Victoria Pierce," she replied simply, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm a nurse at Westlake Memorial." Something unreadable flashed across Cassandra's face. "A nurse? How dedicated." Jackson always had a soft spot for charity cases. Before either could respond, the dinner chimes sounded, and guests began moving toward their assigned tables. Cassandra disappeared into the crowd with a final meaningful glance at her ex-husband. "I apologize for that," Jackson said quietly as they walked toward the dining area. "Cassandra has a flair for dramatic entrances." "There's no need to apologize," Victoria assured him, still processing the strange encounter. "Family situations can be complicated." Jackson's smile held a hint of sadness. "Indeed they are. Especially for my son, Hunter. He's 8 now, caught between two worlds and belonging fully to neither." As they approached table 3, Victoria noticed a small boy sitting quietly between two empty chairs. He had Jackson's striking blue eyes but softer features, his small frame nearly swallowed by a child-sized tuxedo. He was meticulously arranging and rearranging the silverware beside his plate, his face set in concentration. "Hunter," Jackson called softly, "there's someone I'd like you to meet." The boy looked up, his eyes moving past his father to land on Victoria. For a long, strange moment he simply stared at her, his small face utterly still. Then, without warning, he stood from his chair and walked directly to Victoria, reaching for her hand. "You came," he said, his voice filled with a certainty that sent a chill down Victoria's spine. "I knew you would." Before Victoria could respond, Hunter Blackwood, son of one of the richest men in America, wrapped his arms around her waist and looked up with tears in his eyes. "I've been waiting for you, Mommy." The room seemed to freeze. Victoria stood paralyzed, aware of Jackson's shocked expression, the sudden silence at nearby tables and the small boy clinging to her as if she were his lifeline to the world. A lifeline to a child she had never met before tonight. Victoria felt the weight of 100 stares boring into her. The elegant dinner suddenly seemed to exist in slow motion. Waiters paused mid-stride, conversations halted, and the soft orchestral music faded into insignificance. Hunter's small arms remained wrapped around her waist, his face pressed against her dress with absolute conviction. Jackson recovered first, gently placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Hunter," he said, his voice carefully modulated. "This is Ms. Pierce. She's a nurse from the children's hospital I told you about." Hunter shook his head vigorously, without loosening his grip on Victoria. "No, Dad. It's her. Look at her eyes." His voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "They're the same as mine." Victoria knelt down to Hunter's level, her nursing instincts taking over despite her confusion. The boy's blue eyes were indeed remarkably similar to her own, a distinctive shade somewhere between sapphire and cornflower that had always drawn comments. But the resemblance ended there. His fine blonde hair and aristocratic features clearly marked him as a Blackwood. "I'm Victoria," she said gently. And while I'm very happy to meet you, Hunter, I'm not your mommy. I think you might have mistaken me for someone else. Hunter's face crumpled in frustration. You don't remember, he said, his voice breaking. They said you wouldn't. Before Victoria could respond, Cassandra materialized beside them, her red gown like a splash of blood against the cream-colored decor. What an interesting little scene, she remarked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Hunter, darling, come sit with Mommy. Hunter's reaction was immediate and visceral. He recoiled, stepping behind Victoria as if seeking protection. She's not my real mother, he insisted, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. My real mother has come back. Cassandra's perfectly composed facade cracked momentarily, revealing genuine hurt beneath the polished exterior. She recovered quickly, summoning a public smile that didn't reach her eyes. Children and their imaginations, she said with a brittle laugh. Hunter has been going through a phase lately. Perhaps this isn't the best venue for family discussions, Jackson intervened, his voice low but authoritative. He nodded to a suited man standing discreetly near the wall, Hunter's security detail, Victoria presumed, who immediately approached. Thomas will take Hunter to the quiet room we arranged, Jackson explained to Victoria. He sometimes gets overwhelmed at large events. I don't want to go, Hunter protested, clinging tighter to Victoria. Please don't make me leave her. Victoria's heart twisted at the boy's distress. Though the situation was bizarre and uncomfortable, her years of pediatric nursing had taught her to recognize genuine emotional distress in children. Whatever was happening here went beyond a simple case of mistaken identity. Would you like me to come with you for a little while? She offered, looking to Jackson for permission. Just until you're feeling better. Relief flooded Hunter's face. Jackson nodded gratefully, while Cassandra's expression hardened. How charitable of you, Cassandra remarked acidly, taking such a personal interest in a child you've just met. One might almost suspect an ulterior motive. Enough, Cassandra, Jackson said firmly. Victoria is a guest and a healthcare professional. Your insinuations are both incorrect and unwelcome. As Thomas led them toward a door near the back of the ballroom, Victoria heard Cassandra hiss to Jackson, You can't possibly believe this is a coincidence. The quiet room turned out to be a small library adjacent to the main event space, elegantly appointed with leather-bound books and comfortable furniture. Hunter immediately relaxed once they were away from the crowd, though he kept close to Victoria as they sat on a plush sofa. Would you like to tell me why you think I'm your mother? Victoria asked gently, after Thomas had discreetly positioned himself outside the door. Hunter regarded her solemnly. Because of the picture, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, and because of what happened in my dreams. What picture, Hunter? The one in Grandma Eleanor's silver box. Dad doesn't know I found it. Hunter lowered his voice conspiratorially. It was hidden in her desk, the one nobody's supposed to touch. The lady in the picture looks exactly like you, and on the back it says, Elizabeth and Baby, 1997. Victoria felt an odd chill. And who is Elizabeth? I don't know, Hunter admitted, but when I asked Grandma who she was, she got really quiet and said some secrets are kept for a reason and that I shouldn't tell anyone about the picture, especially not Dad or Cassandra. Victoria's mind raced. She had been born in 1990, making her only 7 years old in 1997, clearly not old enough to be anyone's mother. This had to be a misunderstanding, a child's imagination combined with family complications she didn't understand. And the dreams? She prompted. Hunter's expression turned distant. I dream about a lady who looks like you singing to me. Not regular songs, but special ones that nobody else knows. His eyes suddenly focused intently on Victoria. Do you know the butterfly song? Victoria felt her blood run cold. As a child, her mother had sung her a peculiar lullaby about butterflies carrying dreams, a song her mother claimed to have invented herself. Victoria had never heard anyone else sing it. What butterfly song? She asked, her mouth suddenly dry. Hunter began to sing softly, his clear voice carrying the familiar melody that had accompanied Victoria to sleep throughout her childhood. The song, Nobody Else Should Know. The door opened before Hunter could finish, and Jackson entered, his expression a careful mask of composure. How are we doing in here? He asked, sitting in an armchair opposite them. Dad, I was telling her about the butterfly song, Hunter said eagerly. Something flickered across Jackson's face. Recognition followed by concern. Hunter. Why don't you ask Thomas to take you to get some ice cream from the dessert table? I need to speak with Miss Pierce for a moment. Though clearly reluctant, Hunter nodded and left the room after a final lingering look at Victoria. When they were alone, Jackson leaned forward, his composed demeanor giving way to visible distress. I owe you an explanation and an apology, he began. Hunter has been going through some difficulties since his grandmother, my mother, passed away 3 months ago. They were extremely close. I'm very sorry for your loss, Victoria said sincerely. Thank you. My mother was Hunter's primary caretaker when he was younger. Cassandra and I divorced when he was just 2, and my work often took me away for extended periods. Jackson rubbed his temples, the gesture making him suddenly appear vulnerable. Since her death, Hunter has become fixated on this idea that his real mother is out there somewhere. He mentioned a photograph, Victoria said carefully. Jackson sighed heavily. Yes, I know the one. It's a picture of my sister, Elizabeth, holding Hunter when he was an infant. She died in a car accident when he was only 6 months old. I'm so sorry, Victoria said, the pieces beginning to fall into place, and I must bear some resemblance to her. The resemblance is striking, Jackson admitted, studying Victoria's face. When I first saw you tonight, I thought... He trailed off, shaking his head. It's uncanny, actually. But of course you're much younger than Elizabeth would be now. That explains why Hunter might think I'm his mother, but not why he would think his aunt was his mother, Victoria pointed out gently. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. There were complications surrounding Hunter's birth. Cassandra suffered from severe postpartum depression and was hospitalized for the first several months of his life. Elizabeth stepped in as his primary caregiver during that time. His voice softened. She was the one who sang to him, who fed him, who soothed him when he cried. In those formative early months she was, for all practical purposes, his mother. And then she died suddenly, Victoria supplied, her heart aching for the infant who had lost the only mother figure he had known. Yes, Cassandra recovered and took on her role as Hunter's mother, but there was always a distance between them. Hunter is a sensitive child, and Cassandra's temperament is... Jackson searched for a diplomatic word. I think I got a sense of it, Victoria said with a small smile. Recently, after my mother died, Hunter found a journal she kept during that period. I haven't seen it myself, but apparently it contained details about Elizabeth's role in his early life. Since then, he's constructed this narrative that Elizabeth was his biological mother, not his aunt, and that somehow she didn't really die. Victoria nodded, understanding the psychological mechanism at work. Children often create elaborate narratives to make sense of loss. It's actually quite common. What isn't common, Jackson said, his eyes meeting hers directly, is finding someone who looks so much like the person they've lost that it reinforces the fantasy. Victoria stepped back into the ballroom with Jackson at her side, her mind whirling with questions. The charity dinner continued around them, guests oblivious to the emotional drama unfolding in their midst. Hunter sat at their table, carefully eating ice cream, while Thomas stood watchfully nearby. When he spotted Victoria, his face lit up with unmistakable joy. You came back, he said, relief evident in his voice. Of course I did, Victoria replied, taking the seat beside him. I said I would. Across the room, Cassandra was holding court with a group of socialites, her laugh carrying over the ambient noise. She caught Victoria's eye briefly, her gaze sharp with undisguised hostility. Ladies and gentlemen, announced the event host from the stage, dinner service will conclude shortly, and our program will begin in 15 minutes. Please find your seats. Jackson leaned toward Victoria. I should warn you, I'm expected to make a speech about the Foundation's work. Would you mind keeping Hunter company? He seems calmer with you here. Of course, Victoria agreed, though her instincts told her she should politely excuse herself from this increasingly complicated family situation. Yet something about Hunter's vulnerability and obvious need kept her anchored to her seat. As Jackson left to prepare for his speech, Hunter scooted his chair closer to Victoria's. I have something to show you, he whispered, reaching into his small tuxedo pocket. He withdrew a folded photograph, creased from frequent handling, and carefully smoothed it open on the table. Victoria's breath caught. The photograph showed a young woman holding an infant, her face turned partly toward the camera with a gentle smile. Though the hairstyle was different, longer with bangs framing the face, the resemblance to Victoria was undeniable. They shared the same distinctive blue eyes, the same heart-shaped face and delicate nose. If Victoria didn't know better, she might have believed it was a photograph of herself with a baby. "This is your Aunt Elizabeth?" she asked softly. Hunter nodded solemnly. "Grandma Eleanor wrote on the back," he said, carefully turning over the photograph. In elegant handwriting, someone had inscribed, "Elizabeth and baby Hunter, May 1997, our secret blessing." Victoria frowned slightly at the curious wording. "What do you think your grandmother meant by secret blessing?" Hunter shrugged. "I don't know, but there's more in her diary." "Your father mentioned you found a diary," Victoria said carefully. "What else did it say?" Hunter glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "It said that Cassandra didn't want me, that she was going to give me away. But Dad and Aunt Elizabeth wouldn't let her. Then Grandma wrote something about arrangements and protecting the family name." His young face scrunched in concentration. "The last thing about Elizabeth said she was making the ultimate sacrifice for love." Victoria's professional compassion warred with her growing sense that she was being drawn into something deeply private and potentially painful. "Hunter, sometimes adults write things in diaries that are complicated and not meant for children to read." "But there's more," Hunter insisted. "After Aunt Elizabeth died, Grandma wrote that the accident solved one problem but created another." "Don, isn't that a weird thing to say? Like she was glad Aunt Elizabeth died?" Victoria chose her words carefully. "I'm sure your grandmother loved your aunt very much. Sometimes when people are grieving, they express themselves in ways that might seem strange later." Hunter wasn't satisfied. "But then why did she keep the butterfly music box hidden in her closet? And why did she cry when I found it and asked her to play it for me?" "Butterfly music box?" Victoria echoed, that strange chill returning. "It plays the butterfly song," Hunter explained, as if it were obvious. "Grandma said Elizabeth made it specially recorded for me when I was born." Before Victoria could process this new information, the lights dimmed slightly, and Jackson took the stage. The audience applauded politely as he approached the podium, every inch the confident billionaire philanthropist. "Good evening," he began, his deep voice resonating through the ballroom. "The Children's Hope Foundation was established with a simple but profound belief that every child deserves not only medical care but compassion, dignity, and the chance to simply be a child, even in the midst of illness." As Jackson continued his speech, Victoria felt someone slide into the empty chair on her other side. She turned to find Margaret Harrington, the kind elderly woman who had first welcomed her to the gala. "Quite a stir you've caused, my dear," Margaret whispered, her eyes twinkling with interest rather than judgment. "It's been an unusual evening," Victoria admitted. Margaret's gaze shifted to Hunter, who was still studying the photograph. "He's a special boy, isn't he? So much like his mother." "His aunt, you mean?" Victoria corrected gently. "I understand there's a resemblance." Margaret looked momentarily confused. "Oh, of course. His aunt." She patted Victoria's hand. "You know, I've known the Blackwood family for decades. I was on the hospital board with Eleanor, Hunter's grandmother, for many years." Victoria's interest sharpened. "You knew Elizabeth then?" "Dear Elizabeth," Margaret nodded, her expression softening. "Such a compassionate soul. She was a pediatric nurse, you know." Victoria felt as if the floor had tilted beneath her. "Elizabeth was a nurse." "Oh yes, at Mercy West. She had such a gift with children." Margaret's eyes grew distant with memory. "It nearly destroyed her when the doctors told her she could never have children of her own." Victoria's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized she was solving. A pediatric nurse who couldn't have children. A sister who stepped in during a postpartum crisis. A baby who bonded with his aunt instead of his mother. Family secrets and arrangements to protect a name. On stage, Jackson was concluding his speech, which is why, tonight, I am announcing a new initiative, the Elizabeth Blackwood Pediatric Care Program, which will provide specialized training for nurses who work with critically ill children. The audience burst into applause. Jackson's eyes found Victoria in the crowd, his expression unreadable. "Elizabeth Blackwood was my sister," Jackson continued once the applause subsided. She dedicated her short life to caring for children, believing that medical treatment without emotional support was only half the healing process. Though she left us too soon, her legacy lives on in every child who receives not just treatment, but genuine care. As Jackson stepped away from the podium amid renewed applause, a commotion erupted near the ballroom entrance. A distinguished older man with silver hair had entered, his face flushed with apparent anger. He moved directly toward Cassandra, who had risen from her seat in obvious alarm. "Who's that?" Victoria asked Margaret, noticing the sudden tension in the room. "Richard Reynolds, Cassandra's father," Margaret replied, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Former district attorney and still one of the most powerful men in the city. Not someone you want as an enemy." Victoria watched as Richard Reynolds engaged in an intense, whispered conversation with his daughter. Cassandra's face cycled through expressions of defiance, shock, and finally what appeared to be genuine fear. She glanced repeatedly toward their table, her eyes fixing on Hunter with an expression Victoria couldn't decipher. "So what's happening?" Hunter asked, sensing the undercurrents of adult tension. "I'm not sure," Victoria answered honestly, instinctively placing a protective arm around the boy's shoulders. Jackson returned to the table just as Cassandra and her father approached from the opposite direction. The resulting convergence created a tableau of barely suppressed emotion that drew curious glances from nearby guests. "We need to talk," Richard Reynolds stated without preamble, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Privately. All of us." His gaze shifted to Victoria, narrowing slightly. "Including the nurse." "This isn't the time or place, Richard," Jackson replied evenly. "It wasn't supposed to be," Reynolds agreed, his tone clipped. "But when my security team informed me that a woman bearing a remarkable resemblance to Elizabeth Blackwood was sitting with my grandson, I decided tonight's charity charade could wait." "Grandfather!" Hunter exclaimed, half rising from his seat. "She's not just someone who looks like Aunt Elizabeth, she's my real mother." A heavy silence fell over their small group. Cassandra's face had gone pale, while her father's complexion darkened dangerously. "Hunter, please go with Thomas," Jackson instructed, his voice gentle but brooking no argument. "The adults need to talk." "No," Hunter protested. "Every time adults talk, more secrets happen." "Hunter," Victoria said softly, "sometimes grown-ups need space to sort out complicated things. I promise I'm not going anywhere without saying goodbye to you first." Her assurance seemed to calm him, and he reluctantly allowed Thomas to lead him away, looking back repeatedly as they left. Once Hunter was out of earshot, Richard Reynolds spoke again, his voice low and threatening. 25 years of careful arrangements, destroyed in one evening because you couldn't leave well enough alone, Blackwood. "I had no idea Victoria would be here tonight," Jackson replied coldly. "This is genuinely coincidental." "Coincidental?" Reynolds scoffed. "A woman who could be Elizabeth's twin just happens to appear at the exact charity event where your entire family is present. I wasn't born yesterday." "I can assure you," Victoria interjected, her patience wearing thin, "I have no idea what's going on here. I'm simply a nurse who was invited to represent my hospital." Reynolds studied her with calculating eyes. "Westlake Memorial, correct? Pediatric department." When Victoria nodded, his laugh held no humor, of course. Just like Elizabeth. "Tell me, Miss Pierce, were you adopted by any chance?" The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But how could you possibly know that?" Victoria felt as though the floor beneath her had disappeared. The ambient sounds of the gala, the clinking glasses, muted conversations, soft orchestral music, all faded into a distant hum. Richard Reynolds's question had struck a nerve so deeply personal that she could barely form a response. "How did you know I was adopted?" she repeated, her voice stronger now, demanding an answer. Reynolds' expression shifted to one of calculated assessment. "Because, Ms. Pierce, I was the attorney who handled the paperwork." "Richard," Jackson warned, stepping closer to Victoria as if to shield her, "this is not the place." "On the contrary," Reynolds countered, "this is exactly the place, surrounded by witnesses, media, and the social elite. Perfect insurance against any rash actions." Margaret Harrington, who had remained silent during the exchange, suddenly rose from her seat. "I think we should continue this discussion in the library," she suggested, her kind voice now steely with authority. I'm still on the board of this hotel, and I can assure you complete privacy." Minutes later, they were assembled in the same room where Victoria had spoken with Hunter earlier. The door was closed, with Thomas standing guard outside to ensure they wouldn't be disturbed. Victoria sat rigidly on the edge of a leather chair, her mind racing as she tried to process Reynolds's claim. Jackson stood near the fireplace, his posture tense. Cassandra paced near the window, while her father took a seat directly across from Victoria. Margaret positioned herself as a mediator between the factions. "Ms. Pierce," Reynolds began, his tone now professionally detached. "What do you know about your adoption?" Victoria hesitated, then decided that transparency was her only option. "I was adopted as an infant by James and Mary Pierce in Massachusetts. Closed adoption, private arrangement. My parents told me when I was 12, but they had very little information about my birth parents." She met Reynolds' gaze directly. "They said my birth mother was young, unmarried, and wanted me to have a better life than she could provide. A convenient narrative," Reynolds remarked, "and one that contains elements of truth, as all good lies do." "Richard," Margaret interjected sharply, "there's no need for cruelty. Victoria is as much a victim of these circumstances as anyone." "Victim?" Cassandra finally spoke, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "What about me? What about the promises that were made, the agreements that were signed?" Victoria looked between them all in growing frustration. "Would someone please tell me what's going on? How are you connected to my adoption? What does this have to do with Elizabeth Blackwood?" Jackson moved to sit beside Victoria, his presence oddly reassuring in the midst of this confusion. "Victoria," he said gently, "I believe the truth is that you are Elizabeth's biological daughter." The words hung in the air, impossible, and yet somehow resonating with a ring of truth that Victoria felt in her bones. "That's not possible," she protested. "I was born in 1990. If Elizabeth was your sister, she would have been 17, Jackson supplied. "She was 17 when she had you, and our father was running for the Senate. A pregnant, unmarried teenage daughter would have destroyed his campaign, so arrangements were made. Very discreet, very final arrangements." Victoria's mind reeled. "If that's true, then Hunter is your half-brother, not your nephew," Margaret finished softly. Cassandra laughed bitterly. "Oh, it's much more complicated than that. Tell her the rest, Jackson. Tell her about our little arrangement." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Cassandra and I had a marriage of convenience," he explained to Victoria. "Our fathers were business partners, and the merger of our families was financially advantageous to both. What neither family knew was that Cassandra had been involved with my brother, Andrew. When I became pregnant," Cassandra continued, her voice flat, "it was a problem. I was engaged to Jackson, not Andrew, and Andrew was already married." Victoria struggled to follow the tangled web of relationships. "So Hunter is actually your child with Jackson's brother? Not with Jackson?" "Andrew died before Hunter was born," Jackson explained. "A convenient accident while sailing. My father suspected suicide, but the official ruling was accidental drowning." "And Elizabeth?" Victoria pressed, trying to understand her birth mother's role in this saga. "Elizabeth never got over giving you up," Margaret said gently. "When Cassandra's pregnancy became complicated and she threatened to terminate rather than deal with the inconvenience, Elizabeth intervened. She promised to help raise the child if Cassandra would carry to term. She was obsessed," Cassandra corrected coldly. "She saw Hunter as a replacement for the baby she lost, you." "Elizabeth was the only one who showed any real love for Hunter from the beginning," Jackson countered. "When Cassandra developed postpartum depression, Elizabeth became his primary caregiver. The bond between them was immediate and profound." Victoria felt tears welling in her eyes as the picture became clearer. "And then she died in a car accident when Hunter was 6 months old." A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard Reynolds was the one who finally broke it. "That's the official story." Victoria's gaze snapped to him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Reynolds replied deliberately, "that certain people found Elizabeth's attachment to Hunter concerning. She had begun making inquiries about her own child, about you, Ms. Pierce. She threatened to expose everything if she wasn't allowed to be part of your life as well as Hunter's. She was unstable," Cassandra insisted, "emotional, unpredictable. She was a mother who had lost her child, Margaret corrected firmly, and then found herself caring for another child who needed her desperately. Victoria turned to Jackson, whose face had grown ashen. "Did you know about her death?" "Not until years later," he answered, his voice hollow. "By then, the arrangements were irreversible. Hunter had already lost one mother figure. I couldn't bear to destroy his world again by exposing the truth." "Which is what exactly?" Victoria demanded, her patience exhausted. Was Elizabeth's death truly an accident? Richard Reynolds' expression remained impassive. "Let's just say that the brake lines on her car had been carefully compromised. Not enough to fail immediately, but enough to ensure a catastrophic failure at high speed." His cold eyes fixed on Cassandra, an elegant solution to an inconvenient problem. Cassandra flinched, wrapping her arms around herself. "You said no one would get hurt," she whispered. "You promised it would just frighten her enough to leave town." The implication was unmistakable. Victoria felt physically ill. "You arranged the death of your child's caregiver, of my mother. I was 22, terrified, and being manipulated by everyone around me," Cassandra cried, genuine anguish breaking through her polished exterior. "My father said he would handle it, make her go away without scandal. I never wanted—" "But you did nothing to stop it," Jackson said, the quiet pain in his voice more damning than any shout could have been. "And you let me believe it was a tragic accident for years." Reynolds remained unmoved by the emotional display. "The point is, Miss Pierce, your appearance tonight has destabilized a very delicate arrangement. Hunter has already formed an attachment to you, believing you to be his mother rather than his half-aunt. The press will inevitably notice the resemblance. Questions will be asked. Investigations may be reopened." "Are you threatening me?" Victoria asked incredulously. "I'm offering you an opportunity," Reynolds corrected. "Financial compensation, a new position at a prestigious hospital far from New York, a fresh start, in exchange for your discretion and immediate departure from Hunter's life." "Absolutely not," Jackson interjected, before Victoria could respond. "Those days are over, Richard. No more secrets, no more arrangements. Hunter deserves the truth, or at least as much of it as a child his age can handle. And Victoria deserves to know her own history. You'll destroy your family's reputation, your company's standing," Reynolds warned. "The scandal will be unprecedented." "I don't care," Jackson replied simply. "I've protected the wrong things for too long." Victoria sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the revelations of the past hour. She had entered this charity gala as Victoria Pierce, pediatric nurse with a simple background and straightforward life. Now she was potentially Elizabeth Blackwood's daughter, Hunter's half-aunt, and the unwitting catalyst for exposing decades of family secrets. "I need time to process this," she finally said, "and I'd like a DNA test to confirm whether Elizabeth was truly my mother." "Of course," Jackson agreed immediately. "Whatever you need." "And Hunter?" Victoria asked. "What do we tell him?" "The truth," Jackson said firmly, "in an age-appropriate way, that you're not his mother, but you are family, his aunt, that Elizabeth loved him very much, and that it's okay for him to love her memory, and that you're not going to disappear from his life if that's what you want." Victoria thought of Hunter's immediate connection to her, the butterfly song they both knew, the photograph he treasured. "I think that's what Elizabeth would want," she said softly. Cassandra had grown quiet, her earlier defiance replaced by something that looked almost like resignation. "He's always known somehow," she admitted, "that I wasn't the one who sang to him, who held him when he cried. He's been looking for Elizabeth his whole life." Her gaze met Victoria's. "And he found you instead." 3 months later, Victoria sat on a bench in Central Park, watching Hunter feed the ducks at the pond. The DNA test had confirmed what she had already come to believe. Elizabeth Blackwood was indeed her biological mother. The revelation had set in motion profound changes in her life, including regular visits with Hunter, who was thrilled to discover his Aunt Victoria and the connection to the mother figure he had lost. "He's happier than I've seen him in years," Jackson observed, sitting down beside her. In the months since the charity gala, they had developed a friendship built on shared family ties and mutual respect. "Having you in his life has given him a connection to Elizabeth that photos and stories never could." "He's an amazing kid," Victoria replied, smiling as Hunter carefully distributed bread crusts among the ducks, making sure even the smallest ones got their share. Elizabeth would be proud of him. And of you, Jackson added quietly. She would be proud of the woman you've become. Victoria's journey to understand her origins was still ongoing. She had met with her adoptive parents, sharing the truths she had discovered. Their love and support had never wavered. They had always wanted what was best for her, even if they hadn't known the full circumstances of her adoption. As for Cassandra, she had entered an exclusive rehabilitation facility to address the substance issues she had concealed for years. Richard Reynolds faced a less certain future. The reopened investigation into Elizabeth's death had uncovered sufficient evidence to bring charges, though the legal process was just beginning. "What about you?" Victoria asked Jackson. "This can't have been easy on your business, your reputation." "Some things matter more than reputation," he replied simply. "Hunter matters. The truth matters. And strangely enough, the company has survived. People respect honesty, even when it comes with painful revelations." Hunter ran back to them, his face flushed with excitement. "Aunt Victoria! Dad! Did you see? The baby ducks followed me all the way around the pond." "They know a kind heart when they see one," Victoria told him with a smile. As Hunter launched into a detailed description of his duck adventure, Victoria felt a sense of peace settle over her. The story of her origins was more complicated and painful than she could have imagined, but it had led her to family she never knew she had. She thought of the butterfly song, the unexpected connection that had spanned generations, and imagined Elizabeth somehow knowing that one day her children would find each other. Not the ending anyone had scripted, but perhaps the one Elizabeth had always hoped for.